Welcome to Lockbox, a podcast providing real estate professionals with action items for success. My name is Jeffrey Brogger, and I'm going to be your host. I'm the founder of two real estate marketing and tech companies, STEEZY.Digital and realnurture.io. In this podcast, you'll learn from top 1% real estate and mortgage brokers the exact secrets to their success. Welcome to Lockbox. Welcome to Lockbox. My name is Jeffrey Brogger, and today I am here with Edward Mermelstein. Ed, thanks for being with us.
Pleasure to be with you today, Jeff.
Yeah, so why don't you tell our listeners who you are and where you're from?
I am originally from the Ukraine. That makes me, I guess, a refugee from 1974. That's a popular thing these days. But who I am today, I am a formerly active attorney. I still practice to some degree, but primarily in the field of family office space, representing high net worth families that are investing in the United States.
Got it. And you mentioned that, former attorney, and then now you're focusing mostly on real estate and in multiple capacities, and we'll get into that. But what got you into real estate in the first place?
So having grown up in New York and specifically Manhattan, when I was in college, my brother started working in the real estate field for a couple of small firms and then some larger firms. And I started following him as he was rising in the real estate space. So my first job started as an sales associate in a newly built condo in 1989. And that was pretty much the worst time to go into real estate, other than maybe in 2008, 9, and more recently in 2020. I wound up taking over as head of sales in this condominium because the head of sales just walked away. There was no one coming into the building. And that's how I started my experience in the real estate space.
Very interesting. So your brother got you into it, kind of led the way. Well, now you have One and Only, right? And great brand, by the way. Love the name. So One and Only, it appears to be both, One and Only Realty, as well as then there's a different side, and it seems like there's two different sides of it. So why don't you explain a little bit more about One and Only?
Sure. So One and Only Holdings, which is our parent company, and that's where we run our family office representation out of, basically representing high net worth families that are coming to the United States from developing markets. And that focus was born from my background as an immigrant from another country, speaking another language. I started representing clients back in 1995. Coming primarily from the former Soviet Union. That was mostly on the legal end as an attorney. And as time went on, we started doing more personalized work for them outside of the legal side, your basic closings and corporate type representation. So as that side of the business started to grow and our legal work became less and less of a focus on my end, we started transitioning into doing more of the business work and the investment side, which is taking care of clients' needs that are more focused on investing money in the United States, originally on the real estate side, more recently transitioning into private equity venture capital space. So the One and Only Holdings part of our business was more the consulting type work that you would normally do as a family office, and then all the other personalized type of work we would be doing for the clients as it relates to their family needs. So whether it's education focused type of representation or medical representation, and then everything else that your typical billionaire would need that's coming into the United States for the first time from some of these emerging markets. So our clients originally were coming from the former Soviet Union. So I would say Russia, for the most part, was our biggest client base. That transitioned into Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan. And then over the last 10 years, we started shifting into other emerging markets So China became a very large part of our business, and other Asian countries, as well as more recently the Middle Eastern countries. So Dubai, Saudi, etc.
Interesting. So really focusing on international immigration for high net worth individuals and transferring their life and wealth over to the United States.
That's basically it. The idea is to give them the ability to transact as though they're in their own country. But the fact is that there is such a large barrier in terms of cultural differences as well as language barriers. So our job is to create a solution for them that gives them the ability to transition into the United States, whether it's their whole family or part of their family, allowing them to transact at the same level they would in their own country. And the Realty end is a boutique real estate firm that sort of spun off from the fact that our clients needed to find homes when they came to the United States. And when somebody is coming into the United States for the first time, looking for a place to put either their children or their entire family, they were looking for homes that were quite high end. And rather than just handing over the client to someone else who doesn't really know how to deal with foreign clients, we had the experience from the legal perspective of representing these types of clients. So we just transitioned into the business side of it. And it was very much a natural transition that worked out quite well, expanded our business into other space, and it just took off from there. And 25, 30 years later, we've been having a fun time representing foreigners coming into the United States for the first time.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. You're offering lateral service to your client who has a separate need, which you can fulfill. And it also created another vertical for your firm. So love that. And, just to put things in context for my listeners, how what was your transaction volume last year, just on the Realty piece?
Well, last year was an anomaly because very few people were coming into the United States.
Sure.
Period.
So maybe 2019.
So 2019 was quite a good year. So in terms of overall volume, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollar range. And in terms of going back in time, we've had over several $1 billion worth of transactions representing foreign investors. It's been really a great run and very blessed, very lucky to be in this space. That's the wonderful thing about the United States is if you work hard, you study hard, sky's the limit. So we were just lucky enough to find a niche that wasn't being really covered by anyone else. Originally, from the law perspective, so representing clients as an attorney was a great experience, and that transitioned into the business side. So our competition, if you want to call it that, are some of the largest consulting firms in the world. So the McKinseys, the Bains of the world. They typically do not work with our type of clients simply because our clients really are not comfortable with working with those types of consulting firms. The level of corporate interaction is very different than when you're dealing with an individual that has made a tremendous amount of money within a fairly short period of time. That understanding that cultural gap and that business gap is quite difficult to get until you start working with people that have made a lot of money in a short period of time that are not used to working with these very large firms. So they're more comfortable on a different level, just basically working one-on-one rather than in very large groups because they have those large groups, those teams around them in their own country. When they come to the United States, they're typically looking for a very personalized relationship, a one-on-one type of a relationship with someone they can trust. And that is a whole other conversation because to get to that point is not the easiest thing in the world, especially when you're dealing with foreigners.
Makes total sense. And I'm curious about the currency exchange. So I've interviewed a few podcast guests who leveraged Bitcoin in order to help international buyers leverage currency, buy a luxury property in cash via Bitcoin and do an instant transfer, completely circumvent the lending process in the United States. So, has that ever come into play with you?
So we've had many conversations with respect to that. That's a very complicated space, especially today, with questions about AML and KYC. It's difficult enough to do it as a US resident. Doing it as a foreigner is even more complicated because you're still subject to all the US regulations and FinCEN, which is a entity that regulates transactions having to do with foreigners, is going to be quite strict about movement of money from overseas. And I think when it comes to Bitcoin, it's going to be even more difficult. So while there's talk about these types of transactions, the ones that actually have taken place, you can maybe count on several hands where you've had several set of transactions of any significant size. It's a very complicated space, and developing now, we're actually working to try to come up with a solution that will allow foreigners to enter our market using Bitcoin. There are major tax implications that are associated with purchases, especially large purchases having to do with Bitcoin, because nobody's going to pay attention for the most part when you're making a purchase in a store or even something larger for a few $1,000s. But when you're buying something for a few $1 million, that changes the whole conversation. There are certain disclosures that you have to make both to the local government as well as to the federal government. So all of those things, while yes, you can do it, an actual successful transaction is very hard to identify. I've spoken to many very prominent attorneys in this space. They all tell me the same thing. We have not experienced a successful transaction with foreigners. There have been a couple, but I would say for the most part, it's very much a developing space.
Yes, I mean, no question, it's a developing space. I was just curious if that was an avenue. So the traditional transaction for you over the last 25, 30 years has been currency exchange into US dollar and then purchasing the property.
Typically, the currency exchange takes place before it comes onshore into the United States. So normally, whoever's purchasing in the United States has already purchased dollars overseas. Right. And is transferring those dollars to the United States. It's very where we have to do the conversion in the US.
Yeah, I'm just curious about that because it adds such a layer of complexity to the entire international transaction. And you mentioned additional regulation with FinCEN and a few other acronyms that I didn't even know. AML, I don't even know what that is.
It's anti-money laundering. Those types of acronyms, yes, they're growing by the day. It's something that I think became much more prominent after 9/11.
Absolutely.
The government all of a sudden just changed the way that foreigners transact in the United States. And then as we moved on over the last 15, 20 years with many political issues taking place with many different countries, and I don't know if we want to get into the whole political conversation, but as you can imagine, with countries like Russia, Iran, Syria, etc., that are not necessarily on best terms with the United States, certain transactions are either impossible or extraordinarily difficult. So our job is to relay that information to our clientele, make sure that they understand what's possible, what's not possible. And then our job is also to let them know probably this may not be the best idea in the world. Maybe you should reconsider coming into the United States. But many people don't listen and they still try to do it. And then they get themselves into trouble where they make the purchase and then a year or several years later, the United States starts knocking at the door, asking them all kinds of questions that they can't answer, and things get very complicated.
Interesting. Yeah. And I've experienced the AML experience on a smaller degree when I was living abroad in Bali. It's a small island in Indonesia. And Indonesia is a country of 18,000 plus islands. 99% of them are predominantly Muslim. And Bali happens to be one of the few Hindu islands there. So very peaceful, very accepting to foreigners. And it's a haven for a lot of Europeans to go travel to and escape. A lot of Russians in Bali, actually. A lot of Germans and, Dutch. And so when I was there, I had to transfer money from the United States to myself for living expenses. It's not a lot. I mean, at the currency exchange there, you can live like a king for almost nothing. But even then, I couldn't PayPal it to myself, couldn't Venmo it to myself. I couldn't, go through a lot of the traditional channels where it's so natural to do that in the United States. I had to go through this very specific service and, transfer it to a bank and have it converted and do all this extra stuff in order to then just pull cash out of an ATM there. So I experienced that because it was a predominantly Muslim country, and it was for, not laundering money to terrorists and all that. So yeah, it adds such a layer of complexity. And as you mentioned, that was on a small scale. With a major transaction like a multi-million-dollar property, I can only imagine the layers of complexity that adds. So good for you for helping, high net worth foreigners to come in, immigrants to come in and live here. Now, you have a scholarship at NYU, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Awesome. Why did you decide to start that?
It started with the fact that I graduated NYU. I think the first part of it, and that the fact that I felt that it was a need for me to give back. So it originally started with the same concept of someone basically helped us when we came to the United States. And I never understood, where did that come from? Who was helping our family? And as I grew up into my 20s and 30s, I started learning more and more about the different organizations that were helping us. And in terms of NYU, I had government assistance, all kinds of different financial aid that assisted me in getting through the university, along with very large debt that I accumulated both from college as well as law school. But having had some success in business, I decided, okay, what can I do to give back? So I started a scholarship for immigrants that were coming into the United States that weren't able to afford to go to college. And that was the first part. And it was focused primarily on the space where I came from, which is the former Soviet Union. So those were scholarships being given to folks like myself that were immigrating from that part of the world into the United States, didn't have funds. So at a certain point, I realized there are very few people coming from that part of the world that don't have money. Those are mostly my clients that have the ability to go to any university anywhere around the globe. And the ones that were able to make it, still, most of them had the financial wherewithal to come to the United States. So in the last couple of years, what myself and my family decided to do was switch from foreigners to folks that are in the United States. And our scholarship now is focused on students whose families aren't able to pay for their school, and is focused on first-time college applicants, meaning that they're the first in their family to go to college, which is a space that I think is very important because those are the families that I think need this type of an education more than anything else, because once you have the first child from the family go to school, like a place like NYU, at that point, the entire family and then all their future generations, I hope, would follow in the same steps. So that's something that is, I think, just as good as what we started. And I've been lucky enough to learn more and more about how to expand my vision and not just look to overseas, but look within the United States as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that I see how that scholarship evolved based on the experience of the immigrants that have moved here, have the means to put their children into any school, Ivy League or not. And so that makes total sense. And that's awesome that you are, giving back. You're at the stage in your life where you're able to start a scholarship in your name. How cool is that?
It's beyond comprehension to me. I never would have thought or imagined that that was possible. But one thing I also learned is many immigrants that came to the United States, especially during the time that I immigrated to the United States, and then in the last 20, 30 years, and mostly from, again, the former Soviet Union, many of those immigrants have had huge, huge success. So as time went by, the need for financial assistance to that sector has diminished quite a bit. So the idea is, okay, who else can we help? So
Yeah,
that's
interesting.
what we found out.
And when it comes to investment, you're helping your high net worth individuals grow their portfolios and have lasting wealth. I noticed on your website the term multifamily. So is multifamily, apartments, maybe like 100 unit and up. Are those the types of investments that you're still doing today?
So yes, and it depends on which part of the country. So in most of the United States, the multifamily space has done extraordinarily well in the last couple of years because of the lack of housing. And then you have spaces or cities like New York and similar types of cities that have had very much growing pains and difficulties when it comes to multifamily because of the regulatory issues within those cities. Those places have become a little bit more complicated to invest in. So I would say, you have to differentiate between places like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, etc. The larger cities that have significant regulation are very much a different animal than the rest of the country that tends to regulate less. And the returns tend to be a lot higher as well. But that's a very long conversation for us to have.
Yes, absolutely. And this podcast is really geared towards the action items for success from top real estate professionals. And the listener base are top brokers on both real estate and mortgage, both residential and commercial. And so I'm curious, what's the single most important action that you take every day and it attributes most to your success?
The one thing that I realized that if you're not putting in the work, you're not going to have the success. So I've run my own business for 25, 30 years at this point almost. So understanding that if I'm not putting in the time and the effort, I'm not going to get much back from it because I'm not working for anyone else. I work for myself. So just waking up every day, trying to figure out what can I do that's different than everybody else, because competing with companies within our space is extraordinarily difficult because most of them are monsters. So whether it's on the brokerage side with companies like Element, Corcoran, Brown Harris Stevens, or Berkshire Hathaway, if you want to talk about national companies, is very difficult. So we're always looking to find a niche, a space that others aren't either covering or doing well. The same thing was done when I was practicing law on a full-time basis. And now as a multifamily office, and when I say multifamily, I'm not talking about the real estate multifamily, I'm talking about representing several families at a time, working with foreign families that are investing in the United States. That space is just as difficult because, again, typically the Western families of high net worth are going to the larger companies, whether it's for banking, they're going to Bank of America or UBS or HSBC. For consulting work, they're going to Bain or McKinsey. Our job is to do things just as well, but differentiate ourselves by doing things a little bit more unique and sometimes better within our space so that we're not competing with these monster companies. Our job is to differentiate ourselves, create a niche that they can't compete with us within.
And with the niche focusing on high net worth immigrants, I think that has totally differentiated you. And are there some other ways that you've been able to differentiate yourself, whether it comes to branding, unique value proposition, messaging, digital marketing, focus on SEO or blogging? Is there like some little secret password or something that you've been doing over the years that has really set you apart?
So we always try to stay ahead of the curve, but also understanding of where our clients are coming from and identifying their interests. So going back a little bit, I guess more than 10 years back, most of the clients that we were working with were not on the internet, had no interest or even understood that space. They were not online. Their children started going online, but they were not. So these are people typically that are today in their late 50s, 60s, and 70s. If you want to compare it to something online, so these are more the people that would be on Facebook rather than Instagram or Snapchat. So their
Baby
children,
boomers.
I guess if you want to call it that, outside of the United States, that term
It's
really
not
doesn't
called that.
exist.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're basically the 55, 60-year-olds and older were the ones that we were focusing on, and they weren't online. So we weren't really focused on doing anything online. It was very much relationship driven. It was very much recommendations from other clients that we were working with for many years. And as time went on, in the last 10 years, we did realize wealth is being shifted to their children. And that transition of wealth required us to start moving into a very different space. So now we are more cognizant of how we appear online, what we need to do online. And we are shifting into certain spaces that we haven't really spent only up to maybe the last couple of years. We haven't spent time prior to that on thinking about the digital world. Although we were investing in the digital world on behalf of our clients, we weren't really spending that much time there. And as we move forward, that's shifting very quickly. So now we are spending a significantly greater amount of time away from real estate, which is where our clients initially were most comfortable in. They wanted to be able to touch what they invested in. Their children are much more entrepreneurial when it comes to the United States and are willing to take on more risk. Their parents took on risk overseas, and when it came to the United States, their interest was mostly to remove risk from anything that they are doing in the United States. Wealth preservation, exactly. So their children, now that their children have very little to worry about in terms of wealth preservation, because their wealth now is in BRICS, is in major corporations around the globe. So now their children are thinking, okay, let me get a little bit more adventurous in terms of what we're looking at to invest in. And we are looking at very interesting connections with our clients. I would have never imagined that they would have been comfortable on doing a Zoom call up to just recently. And many of our clients are slowly transitioning into that world. Not the parents, but the children. The parents are still very nervous about who's listening, who's watching, because they are coming from that world of the government is always watching. So it's been a very interesting transition to watch how things change from the parents to the children.
Yes, that's very insightful and intriguing. And it makes sense that the younger generation would be less risk averse. You know, they're interested in aggressive, more tech forward or venture capitalist style investments. Growing up in the United States myself as a millennial, you know, I grew up with Facebook becoming this multi-billion-dollar juggernaut, and you know, Amazon and you know, Twitter and Snapchat and all these companies just exploding with, you know, essentially no physical product. I mean, they have it's all virtual, digital, and it's a free service that they run ads on. I mean, the concept of all these startups and apps and all these things just exploding, it increases the ceiling of what you think is possible, especially growing up, looking at, you know, I'm speaking from my own experience, looking at the fact that I'm young and I can be more, you know, I can be more aggressive with my investments. Those are the things that I'm interested in now, is swinging for the fences would be a, you know, American term for it. You know, in baseball, like swinging for the home run, because if you miss 12, 14 times, but you hit one, it could be a billionaire. And it's, you know, very, very interesting. So I totally understand that. And when it comes to, the venture capitalist mix and the newer types of investments, are there any particular, you don't have to say specific companies, but are there any particular niches of whether it's like biotech or, are there any particular product mixes that you're most interested in?
So we're looking at what is been quite popular these days. On our end, again, initially connected to the prop tech space and fintech space. Those were areas where our clients were very focused on simply because they were connected to the real estate world. We've gone a little bit outside of that space into the whole crypto world, into nanotechnology. We've been spending quite a bit of time looking at technology, again, related to real estate. So, everything from companies that make the online real estate experience more comfortable. We've been working with companies like UsePillar, which is a company that allows you to put your home or property up for sale within literally 5 minutes. Create your own website and launch it within 5 minutes. And that only a couple of years ago would take, if not days, weeks, which, just it's mind-boggling just thinking about the fact that you can create a website that will allow you to list your apartment within minutes. I mean, who would have thought that something like that was at all possible? But then again, most people don't realize that the iPhone is only about 10, 11 years old. So my children, when you tell them that, they think, how's that possible? I thought it was around, my whole lifetime. Yes, probably. And for 10 years, yes, but they only started using it a couple of years ago. So it's a whole new world. Technology is transforming everything today. And the money that's been made in the last year and a half during the whole COVID crisis that we've been having is just beyond imagination. And most people don't realize that our stock market has exploded in the last year and a half. And this is during one of the biggest financial crises in history.
Yes, which is fascinating. So talking about the markets, housing and stocks, what are your near future projections, maybe 2-3 years?
That's a very complicated response because there are so many things happening, not just in the United States, but globally. And we are leading the charge in terms of spending. So I think ultimately it's going to be a question of, are we able to spend our way, not just from the federal side, but also are we creating enough jobs and growing our economy enough in order to pay for the money that the federal government is spending? Are we able to somehow balance the tax ramifications that will be quite impactful in the next couple of years? Because if some of these increases in taxes do take place, that can be a very, very serious issue that we are going to be dealing with. And not just in terms of increase in taxes, but also what is the dollar going to look like in the next year or two? Inflation is a big concern, and people talk about that every day. But as we print more money, the value of the dollar, technically, it plunges. So these are issues that we have to be aware of and hold our government accountable, because we are spending way, way more money than we're taking in. And the folks in Washington, D.C. over the last, many decades at this point don't seem to be thinking about that. So that's something that I think our younger generation should start knocking on their doors, making the calls and saying, don't forget us. We don't want to be paying 70, 80% to the government in taxes because we work pretty hard to make that money.
Right. Yeah. So many factors. And as you mentioned, global climate, so many arenas to think about. I think a lot of real estate professionals only think about the United States, but there are so many factors, including foreign investment in United States real estate and so many other things that really are, out of the control of, any one person or any one country. And it's this global mix. So super interesting. I mean, we saw in the 2008 financial crisis when the US housing market collapsed, the ripple effect globally. And it's just so interesting how it's tied into all these secondary markets, secondary mortgage markets, mortgage-backed securities, people taking bets on bets on bets on bets. And it's like on the bedrock of the United States housing market. So yeah, it's such an interesting, complex question. And, I didn't expect you to answer it in, 1 or 2 minutes, but really appreciate your insights there.
Yeah, well, it'll definitely keep you up at night if you do recognize all the issues involved, and I try to put it out of my mind and let other people think about it. But at the end of the day, we really have to get serious about these issues, because if it's not us who are going to be dealing with it, whether it's the financial crisis or global warming or whatever the case may be, our children are going to have to deal with it. So why are we doing this in the first place? It's for the future generations, and we have to remember.
That's right. That's right. So what can we do? That's a lot of stuff that we can't control, but what can we do to really, step up or at least, control our own, I guess, life, wealth, future generations?
Well, on my end, what I try to do is I try not to give our government the ability to control what we do on a personal basis, whether it's taxes or any other regulatory issues that affect me. What I try to do, what my family tries to do, is just think of it in terms of paying it forward. If we have the ability to make this world a better place, just do it as an individual and don't count on the US government or any government to do it for you. If we all take it upon ourselves to make this world a better place, that's what's going to happen. If we count on the government to do it for us, I can assure you that they're going to screw it up. So just do your best to make the world a better place. If you can help someone, whether it's someone you walk by in the street and you see you can help them, help them. If it's someone coming from another country into the United States, that's my part. And yes, you can make an argument that those are not the people that need the help, but I can assure you, if they come to the United States and they make it in the United States and they do well here financially, their money is going to, in terms of tax dollars, is going to be helpful to the United States. And that's how I justify that to myself, is that eventually, if they're here, their US tax dollars should be helping America, regardless of how many of those tax dollars enter the United States. Either way, they're not hurting us, they're helping us. So our goal is, if we're seeing whether it's wealthy immigrants or immigrants that are not wealthy and they're coming into the United States legally, we should be helping them. That's my vision, at least.
I love that. And I agree. Not only the macroeconomic climate of taxes, but the microeconomic climate and the ripple effect of high net worth individuals from other countries living in local economies, spending money in those local economies, shopping, eating, buying cars and living their life out there. That's money that's going into the local economy and then rippling back around in the microeconomic climate. So yeah, I agree 100% with that. And I think you're doing a great thing. You really carved out a niche. It was based on your own experience. It was based on something, that you were uniquely qualified for, based on already speaking multiple languages. And it's really cool what you've been able to build over the last 25, 30 years. It's impressive. So in that process, I'm sure there were many failures along the way, but I'm curious if you have a favorite failure of yours, something that set you up for later success.
Well, I've thought about that many times. I think we all have, if you want to call it a failure, but I look at it a little bit differently. I see it as a learning moment, or if you want to look at it from a different side, a teaching moment. So anytime I have a failure, I try to use that as a way to do things better moving forward. And yes, I've had many. In terms of one specific failure, I guess one thing I think I would want to fix if I can go back in time is having done better in school, being a better student, because I think I missed out learning certain things during, whether it's high school or college, that would have helped me improve things in the future. With that said, I'm not regretting anything. It's just, I wish I would have done it a little better. So that's the way I look at it. I'm never going to worry about the past. It's behind. So we just have
Right.
to move forward and work a little bit harder and do things better. And whatever mistakes were made in the past, the whole idea is to learn from them. And sometimes I say, you know what? Let's make that mistake in order to make sure that whether it's myself or my children don't repeat that mistake. But, they always do. All we could do is just try to remind ourselves and others that we've made those mistakes, try not to repeat them. But, that's just normal. That's history, and repeats itself not just for individuals, but for governments and for corporations, etc. It seems like whether it's few years, somebody makes the same mistake over and over again, whether it's in a financial crisis, whether it's in a medical crisis, such as what we're facing today. These are all things that just keep repeating. They're just newer. So our goal, I think, collectively should be, how do we make it better? How do we not repeat what transpired before, whether it was yesterday or 100 years ago? So that's the way I look at it.
Interesting. There's a saying that goes something like, if you do something once, it could be considered a mistake. But if you do something over and over and over again, it becomes your reputation. So learning from mistakes, for me, that means journaling, sitting down, taking time when I'm planning out my next week to journal about the previous week. When I'm planning out my next month, journaling about the previous month, writing down learning lessons, corrections, because if I don't take that time, it's so easy for me to continue making small errors along the way. It might not even be a big thing, but just moving in the wrong direction, not fostering the relationships I truly care about. It could be any number of things. And having that review period has been very important for me. I'm curious, in the last 5 years for you, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most drastically improved your life?
I've been spending, it's funny because you laugh at older people. As they get older, they get closer to religion and to God. I think, just in the last bunch of years, it's not necessarily that I've become more religious, but just thinking about the future within the space of religion, and the idea of how am I going to leave this world, whether it's in 20 years, 50 years, or 75 years, whatever that number is. What can I do to make this world a better place? So that's what I think is driving me these days, especially as I start to get a little bit older and up there in age. And I don't think I'm that old, but my previous 53 years, reflecting on them and some of the things that I've done in my life that I think, okay, maybe I should have done that a little bit better, whether it's education or health or whatever the case may be. Just looking forward, what can I do to leave this world for my children in better shape than it's been in the last 20, 50, whatever period of time. So that's what's driving me. And that's what I think I've learned in the last bunch of years from people that are much, much smarter than myself, or at least they appear to be so. But I think I learned quite a bit from friends that are quite brilliant and are great examples for me. So I try to focus on surrounding myself with people that are smarter, better, and that hopefully rubs off a little bit.
Very wise. The vision for the future. And interesting, getting older and getting closer to religion. I wonder if there's a correlation there, as you've noticed, in your life. So is there a question that I should have asked you, or anything that you would like to elaborate on from earlier?
In terms of what we've been spending time on, and I think you sort of started focusing on how technology is transforming the world, and how, especially in the last year and a half with COVID, how things have just started accelerating in a way that we haven't seen probably since the Industrial Revolution. And that opportunity that we're seeing just transforming in the last year has just been such a wow factor for myself, seeing technology changing the world, making people just so much more productive, allowing us to do all kinds of things, whether it's in medicine, in robotic. The whole world of nanotechnology is just changing everything, whether it's materials that we use in everyday, the whole energy space. I mean, who would have thought, just having grown up watching the Jetsons and the flying cars, that just in the last 10 years, the whole concept of that materializing, and that's where we're heading. We're going to be there fairly soon. It's just a question of who's going to be doing that. But the idea of cars running on batteries, nobody could have ever imagined that would be mass market. And who would have thought just 10 years ago that Tesla would have been doing that, just leading the charge? So things like that just fascinate me and make me say, practically every day when I wake up, wow, I can't believe what I'm reading on Bloomberg today. It's just beyond fascinating. Those are the things that are driving me today, much more so than my love of real estate, that I think I'll die having real estate in my blood. But what's been happening over the last year and a half with all this innovation is just beyond imagination. I would have never thought that I could walk in to my apartment by putting my thumbprint on a lock. These are little tiny things that are just changing how we interact with everything in our lives today.
Makes total sense. And technology has truly enhanced, everyone's life. And whether you realize it or not, there are cons, but the pros so far have outweighed it. And it is a blessing to have grown up and lived in this time. So I agree. I think we're experiencing the fourth industrial revolution, I guess it would be, and it's a technological one. It's one that will be continuously enhanced by machine learning and AI, replacing monotonous jobs that robots should be doing anyway, and then allowing more time freedom, more prosperity, more wealth, hopefully, for the rest of the world, so that everyone can focus more time doing what they truly love and enjoy doing. That would be the goal. That's the kind of the utopian future that I feel like a lot of humans are working towards, and truly is amazing to be living in this time.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
How can listeners contact you?
That's the easiest thing in the world today on the internet. So whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, our website, or personal web pages, LinkedIn, you name it, that's the easiest thing in the world. So it's just a question of time. I wish I had more time in the day. I wish the day was not 24 hours. It was 80 hours and I can stay awake and do everything that I want to do. But that's the one thing that we're all limited by, is the amount of time that we have in the day and on this planet. So as you get older, and that's the one thing that we touched upon more than once, you start realizing that that's the most important thing that you can't control, is as you get older, the time just ticks away and you have just that much less time on this planet. So make the best of it.
Love that. So Ed Mermelstein, everyone, you've been very generous with your time and really appreciate having you on today. So thank you so much. And I'll definitely link below so that any listeners who are interested can contact you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. If you want to accomplish your real estate goals, then I highly suggest downloading my free Ultimate Real Estate Goal Setting Framework. The link is in the description of the show, and it will help you break down your annual income goal into the amount of phone calls, appointments, or open houses you need in order to achieve that goal. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.